Welcome to High Truths on Drugs and Addiction, where national experts bring you facts and answer your questions. I'm your host, Dr. Ronit Lev, an emergency and addiction doctor who has served at the White House and still practices on the front lines. Right here on High Truths, you will learn from experts from around the globe and around all aspects of drugs and addiction. Today's episode is sponsored by ISAC, the International Academy on the Science and Impact of Cannabis. Visit their website at isac1.org, IASIC1.org, to follow the science on marijuana. Friends, fentanyl is plaguing America. There is no safe drug supply unless it comes from a legal pharmacy. If you are around anyone who may be using drugs, you should carry naloxone, the opioid reversal agent. Carrying naloxone for drugs is like carrying an EpiPen for allergies. Come visit me on hightruths.com to learn more about the show, submit a question, or download a free prescription for naloxone. Hello again, High Truth listeners. Get ready for a weedy conversation. I'm your host, Dr. Ronit Lev. On this episode, we will talk about weed, marijuana, cannabis. A very divisive conversation, almost as divisive as, let's say, abortion or gun control. The loud people are either really for it or against it, and probably most people are in the middle of the extremes. But that comes later. First, I want to tell you about a forum I spoke to recently in Santa Rosa, California, sponsored by Northern California HIDTA, High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. HIDTA coordinates law enforcement narcotic efforts from federal, state, tribal, and local agencies. When people think law enforcement or police, the association is usually putting people in jail, incarceration. But to my surprise, law enforcement does much, much more than that. Yes, their job is to keep us safe. Our emergency department, despite having full-time security, calls 911 about 4 times a month because of violence. I've been assaulted at work, knocked to the ground by a patient, and the SWAT team was there really quick. I was very amazed, and I'll always be grateful for the quick and very caring response. But I also see law enforcement officers bring me patients in the emergency department for mental health evaluation. The cops are my children's age, and they talk to me like they're doing an internship in psychiatry. Doc, the patient was hearing voices, hitting the air, and talking and laughing to things that weren't there. He has a prescription of Ferroquel, but I looked at it, and I'm not sure he's really taking his medications. They're amazing. At the HIDTA forum I attended, called Communities in Crisis, the organizers brought together parents whose children died of fentanyl, legislators, educators, public health leaders, and other community leaders. I talked from a medical perspective, and the other speakers talked about solutions from homelessness to the open drug market to social media, journalism, and laws. People would be surprised to learn how much education and prevention is spearheaded by law enforcement. Ironically, I, the doctor, emphasize the importance of deterrence. And with that, let's hear our question of the day.
Hi, Dr. Lev. Thanks for your High Truths education. I learn a lot whenever I listen. I'm a 4th-year medical student and have been absorbing a lot of information over the years, and you add to that. My question is about marijuana. You talk about the many adverse health effects, however, marijuana is legal in most states. There is a major role in healthcare education for this drug. Is law enforcement still involved in the marijuana issue?
Joseph, you are the best. Thank you so much for your question. First, I appreciate all that is thrown your way in medical school, cramming textbooks and data into your brain, and yet you still have time for high truths. And you're right, the medical and health community have a lot to do in terms of cannabis education and prevention of harms. A record high number of pregnant women are using marijuana with adverse effects on their unborn child. You know, we just mentioned fentanyl, and I interview every patient that either overdosed on purpose by accident from fentanyl or wants to get off fentanyl, and invariably they started their journey to drugs by priming their brain with marijuana. Babies are getting poisoned from weed candy. patients need to be screened before surgery for marijuana because it affects their anesthesia effects. And the medical community needs to do a better job in documenting cannabis-associated diagnosis so patients understands what happened to them and are given an opportunity to prevent recurrence of their disease. But Joseph, you asked, how is law enforcement involved? And to answer your question, I have a dynamic duo from the National Marijuana Initiative, NMI. Ed Shemelya is a former Kentucky State Trooper and prior head of the state's narcotic agency. He serves as a coordinator for NMI. Dale Quigley is a law enforcement officer from Colorado and deputy coordinator of NMI. NMI is part of HIDTA, the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Program, which is under the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. Ed and Dale are one of my favorite people, always bringing me a smile, always teaching me something new. And to learn more about NMI, Ed Shemelya, and Dale Quigley, check out the High Truth show notes. Ed and Dale, welcome to High Truths.
Thank you, Renee.
Ed, this is where you say thank you too.
I did say thank you.
And the show is going to be great.
You just couldn't understand me because I was speaking hillbilly.
That's right. And for our guests, you could tell that Ed is from a different country called Kentucky.
That is correct. Coming from the Eastern time zone where it's almost lunchtime here.
That's great. I've been looking forward to this show because you guys are one of my favorite people. Anytime I see you and meet up with you, I always smile. I learn something and I have a great time. So audience will be as well. So let's start, Ed, with you because you're from Kentucky. But tell us about yourself and how you got into law enforcement and what you're doing now and how that lead you to marijuana of all things.
Well, actually, I always wanted to be a cop, so there was never any indecision on my part growing up because I knew as a youngster that's what I wanted to do. After graduating from college, I joined the Kentucky State Police in 1979.
Ed, you didn't want to go into ice cream like your grandfather? And
No.
like
He sold the business. He sold the business. So no, I wanted to be a police officer. That's all I ever wanted to be. And like I said, I joined state police in 79 and spent almost the next 31 years with the Kentucky State Police in a multitude of assignments. But Ronit, one of the things that I saw early on when I went to Pikeville, my first assignment, was marijuana was always present. And it was always available. And you understand, even the 70s, marijuana was a relatively benign substance considering what we're talking about today. But that was the common denominator when you started talking to young people, particularly as I progressed through narcotics and different assignments, when you started looking at drug traffickers who were also users, when you started discussing with them their introduction into illicit substances, it was always alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana. So that kind of piqued my interest. This is a substance we need to be paying attention to. And the last 8 years of my state police career, I spent as the commander of the cannabis suppression in the Kentucky Marijuana Governor Strike Force. And that's all we did was outdoor, indoor grow ops. And Kentucky, most people don't realize that next to your state, Kentucky is the second most prolific outdoor marijuana producing state in the nation. Only California usurps us, and primarily because you have about 5 times the land mass we did that we do in Kentucky. So that's why I have been interested in this topic. When I retired from the state police, I went to the Appalachia HIDTA, is their marijuana coordinator. I spent 4 years coordinating the marijuana activities within that 4-state region. And then for the last 10 years, I've been the national coordinator for NMI. And NMI actually started out in your backyard at the San Diego Imperial Valley HIDTA as an outdoor initiative. And in 2014, NMI started tracking the impacts of legalization. And our focus is primarily on how legalization, either medically or commercial adult use, is having an impact to public health and public safety in this country. So that's a little bit of me in a nutshell. My passion lies on the fact that I have 5 grandkids. Why I do what I do is because of these 5 individuals, and they're the target of this industry. And what we're trying to do is educate people to the reality of where today's marijuana is, who it's impacting, and how it's impacting them.
That's great. And I made the ice cream comment because you have an ice cream scoop and sign on your background.
Yes, I do.
Dale, you're on. Tell us about yourself and how'd you get connected to the Kentucky guy?
Well, I figured somewhere along the lines that the HIDTA program had an ADA or ADHD requirement they had to meet. And that's how I ended up getting hooked up with him. I spent 40 years of my life as a cop out here in Colorado. The vast majority of that was working in drugs and undercover. One of those things that I never thought I would do, but once I was exposed to it, it's like that old pair of sweatpants you got at home and those old tennis shoes you probably should have thrown out. They just feel so good and so right when you put them on at the end of the day. So, that's how I got started into narcotics, from working the streets and doing vehicular homicides to end up working drugs. And it's spot on when he said, one of the common denominators in all of our drug investigations, regardless of the drug that we were investigating, was there was always weed. It was ubiquitous. And it goes back to what we hear today. Well, it's just weed. And that's how people will look at this particular drug. And I think if we're talking about the drug that we all knew back in the 60s and early 70s, we wouldn't be sitting here having these conversations. But that's not the case. That is just not the case. When I retired from law enforcement in 2016 and went to work for the HIDTA program full time, and Ed and I have been together since the first part of 2017. He's paying for sins in an earlier life is my guess. But the whole concept of, well, it's just weed. We need to legalize it. It's good for us. It can't be addictive. There's no withdrawal syndromes. We're a better driver. We realized at the onset of this, there's so much misinformation and disinformation about this particular drug. I think it's probably more misunderstood than any drug in our current pharmacopoeia in America or even in the world right now. So we realized that there's a huge need to displace the misinformation and disinformation promoted by the proponents of legalization and put some facts in there, evidence-based, scientific-based research, good, solid, peer-reviewed facts that say, you know what, you're really not a better driver. And yeah, it truly is addictive. And Renee, you see it on the front lines every night when you go into work, is that the issue that we're seeing in public health and public safety is all tied back to the increased levels of potency that we have never seen before. So, it's one of those ones that, do I miss police work? Yes and no. Do I see a need for what we're doing? Yeah, I do, because there's so much of a vacuum out there that people are operating in, and they're making decisions by and rules and regulations and laws by that is just flies in the face of current research and findings. So, in a short nutshell, I made the loop, saw the need, and have stayed with it because, like Ed, I now have it'll be about 2.4 grandchildren right now.
Awesome.
So, yeah. It's scary that my gene pool is continuing, isn't it? It's just what the world needs is more short people like me. But there's a truly a need out there that we need to fill, and that's what I'm trying to do, is leave a better world for the next generation. Didn't do a great job for the new generation of centurions out there, but maybe I can make it a little bit better for everybody else.
Yes, I've heard that. I've heard people say when they talk to young kids, we didn't do a good job. And it's up to you now to make the world a better, to the new kids, for them to kind of fix it up and make the world a little better.
Yeah, and the sad thing here, Renee, too, is that we are probably the worst messengers on this particular topic. We're two old white guys and old cops.
Yeah.
Undercover cop. How did you, when you said that, used to be undercover cop, because you look more like a cop now. What did you look like when you were undercover?
I had hair back then, Ronnie.
Yes, I did.
Hair, beard, beanie? Like, how do you dress up?
No, initially my hair was longer than yours.
Mm-hmm.
So it just naturally got these beautiful curls in it. The girls at the police department go, "Do you curl your hair?" "No, honey, that just happens naturally," type of thing. But what I found out is that I was actually more effective if I just looked like the average guy. Mm-hmm. So I was the insurance broker. I was the adjuster. And hey, I'm looking for someone to score a little weed with, or a little cocaine with, or some LSD. And if you look like you just belong in plain sight, you can hide in plain sight. And I was pretty successful at it. It worked out really well.
Interesting. Sounds scary.
It had its moments. It had its moments, but you know what? By the grace of God, we all went home at the end of the day with the same number of holes we started our day with in our body. So it was okay. It was okay.
Yeah. But I know it's tough. I know also from Ed, you've talked about that being law enforcement is not an easy career. Interesting that you wanted to do that since you were a little kid. Any of your grandkids want to do that?
Well, I'm doing everything not right. I've got one that's expressed an interest, but I'm doing everything in my power to talk him out of it.
Oh.
And
get a big stick.
I just don't think in today's climate, don't get me wrong, we need good people in law enforcement more than ever. We need people there for the right reasons. But, you know, when you start talking about your own flesh and blood and the reality of today's world and the perception that folks have about law enforcement, I don't want him within 1,000 miles of the profession. And that's sad for somebody that grew up only wanting to be a cop and fulfilled that dream to now feel like you don't want your grandchild to go walk in your footsteps. But hopefully this climate that currently exists in this country, we've got to get back to a point of civility and respect. And even though we might have divergent views, we can have this discourse civilly. And we're not there. And it pains me to see this country continue to be fractured along a lot of lines on a lot of issues and lacking the ability to sit down and have honest discussion about real problems that are affecting real people in this country. And this is one of those topics that we need to have a real discussion about. And we can't seem to do that with the discourse that currently exists in this country.
That is really sad because I'm starting to hear that people for my profession, again, like you have been an emergency physician for over 30 years. And now I'm seeing articles about, you know, emergency medicine is a dumpster fire and all these negative things about the profession. It's like, what? Hey, I think it's you can't negatively talk about your own profession, especially when it's good. And same, I think, for law enforcement.
Well, you guys hit critical mass with COVID.
Yeah.
You know, for the healthcare industry as a whole, for what happened over the last few years associated with COVID and SARS, I just, you wonder why people aren't more burned out than what they say they are. You know, you look at the staffing, the shift work, and the hours that you all put in. God bless you guys for doing it.
I don't think it's any different than law enforcement, and it hasn't changed. It's always been hard. I mean, and that's why we chose emergency medicine. We didn't choose it. You know, I could have been a radiologist, you know, sipping coffee in a dark room, you know.
Yeah, but I think the difference are people still respect and appreciate what you do.
Yes.
And why you do it. I think there's been a 180-degree shift on that perception and of what cops do and why they do it. And a lot of it has to do with, you know, I really think that in today's society, when you're looking at law enforcement as a profession, that a lot of agencies have lowered standards and are just grasping for bodies instead of putting quality people in these positions, irrespective of the numbers. Then, you know, you get what you pay for, is the old adage we say here. And you know, it doesn't take but a couple of instances. And then that whole dynamic shift around perception of a profession. But I don't think there's ever been a time where people don't appreciate what you're doing in the ED and what doctors do across this country. And, but we've seen that perspective change in law enforcement. And we've got to get that back towards center mass here.
Yeah. It could be iffy in emergency medicine as well, but I do appreciate that. All right. Origins of NMI, National Marijuana Initiative. You kind of told us it started in California, but tell us about the organization. What are your objectives? Where do you hope to achieve with NMI?
We are one of the 4 national initiatives that support our 33 HIDTAs across the country. And as I stated, it originated in the San Diego Imperial Valley HIDTA with a focus on outdoor public lands trespass grows on public lands. That morphed in 2014 to taking a look at the impacts. So along with the other three national initiatives, that I'll give a shout out to ORS, the Overdose Response Strategy, Domestic Highway Enforcement, and the National Emerging Trends Initiative, we are the marijuana subject matter experts for the HIDTA community. And essentially and Dale's already stated, we're trying to replace 30 years of misinformation, disinformation, myths around today's marijuana with evidence-based science, research data on the real impacts of legalization, either medically or commercial adult use. You notice we don't use the term recreational marijuana. We've kind of taken that out of our lexicon there, because when we talk about, at least in Kentucky, I don't know about you folks in California, but in Kentucky, when you speak of recreation, it's hiking, biking, hunting, boating, fishing, and it's doing things that enhance the mind, the body, and the spirit. And getting high as a Georgia pine ain't one of those things. So it's commercial adult use marijuana. We don't utilize the industry term recreational, because really there's nothing recreational about it. So that's essentially, Dale, chime in there. That's essentially what we're trying to do is provide our clientele, primarily of the 700 plus drug-free community coalitions across the country, in addition to the 500 or 600 prevention alliances in this country, is to provide them with the information and the educational tools they need to go out and reach their constituency.
Dale, maybe you could tell us some of the specific programs that you do, like this Speakers Bureau that you got me to be part of.
So this was a brainchild that Ed had before I joined the program. We realized that we're limited by our own capacities, right? So Ed knows a great deal about marijuana. I know a great deal about marijuana. I don't know a thing about marijuana as it applies to medicine. I don't know a thing about marijuana as it applies to suicide. We need the people who walk those paths and understand those paths to share their story, to share their information. And so that was kind of the impetus behind it. We started off with one or two speakers, and then as we're exposed to more people who are willing to talk about marijuana and understand the science, the research, and what technology behind it, all of a sudden our Speakers Bureau began to evolve and morph. So now we've got some 18, almost 20 different speakers that speak from different disciplines, everything from pharmaceutical to your community, the medical community, to a law enforcement approach. But more importantly, we're getting the diversity. We've got speakers that talk about the addiction. We're talking about the psychology behind addiction. We're talking about mothers who have lost children to suicide as a result of their child's marijuana use. And what we're finding is that it has a great appeal to audiences because, again, it's not two old guys talking about weed. And the one thing that Ed and I never do, we don't approach this from demon weed, reefer madness. If you're going to smoke this, you're going to go blind. None of our speakers do that. Here's the facts. All the facts are cite sort. So now you can go back and you can fact check it. The bottom line is, if we put good information in front of people, they can make informed decisions. And to us, that's critical. If you're going to choose to smoke it, that's up to you. But be aware of the risk and inherent hazards that go along with it. If you want to legalize it, okay, you can make those choices. But be aware of the consequences that we're seeing now after 10 years of legalization across this country, the consequences that we're seeing that are repeating in jurisdictions over and over and over again. If you go into it with your eyes wide open, I think maybe you make better decisions. And the beauty about our Speakers Bureau, if we send one of our speakers to an event, let's say that you're hosting, they don't cost you a thing. We pay their travel, we pay their airfare, we pay their per diem. Some of these guys take time off of their jobs and have to take PTO, personal leave time. Some ask for a very modest honorarium to do this. We allow that. It's a personal agreement between the host agency and our speaker. But we cover the vast majority of the expenses usually associated to honorariums. So it's a great way to be a force multiplier, to get the information out and to come at it from just a myriad of different directions. And what the nice thing about this is, Renee, when we do these presentations and our speakers do these presentations and you talk to folks afterwards, it's usually the common theme of, I never have heard this before. How come nobody tells us these things before? So it's a great way to look at one issue from different angles. It's just a great approach. It's a great force multiplier. And like Ed said, our drug-free communities, our anti-drug coalitions, state legislative bodies, they're the ones that come out ahead on this because they're getting unfiltered, unbiased information. It's just facts. You decide what you're going to do with it.
And as you know, Ronit, our speakers, as Dale said, a force multiplier, but they're actually able to go onto and do things that we couldn't do. And you were on Dr. Phil, and the reach that in that message, the Ingram angle. We've had our speakers interviewed in New York Times, Wall Street Journal. They've been on CNN. I mean, the reach in their message is on about every medium available. And it's amazing that it started out in 2015 with one individual, and it's morphed to almost 20 now. We're about capacity with our budget to fund travel. But, when we look at what we're trying to accomplish, and that's getting the message out about the reality about what's going on with today's marijuana and legalization, our Speakers Bureau is our greatest asset. And again, as Dale, they're free. You can't beat that deal from the government. What do you get free from the government? Nothing.
That's awesome. I am really honored to be part of that Speakers Bureau. And I think I met you at a HIDTA directors meeting in Washington, D.C., where I kind of spoke. I mentioned scromiting. Some of the HIDTA directors call me now Dr. Scromiting. But you were at a little booth there and said, well, you need to join our Speaker Bureau. And I'm like, okay.
You're exactly right. And after we listened to you in the national conference in D.C., I told we got to get this doc right here, because, you were not only, were you forceful about your message, your passion, but you're extremely knowledgeable about what's going on with today's marijuana. And you did coin that term, scromiting, too. So, that's something to have, on your tombstone at the end of the day, that I'm responsible for coining the term scromiting.
For publicizing it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Remember, no good deed ever goes unpunished.
Right.
It actually is the greatest thing I've done in a career, because it changed patient perspective. Because for years I would say, you have cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, and then patients would be like, what are you talking about? Like, you're they wouldn't believe me. And if I say you're scromiting, they're like, I guess I am, and they'd look it up and they find out about it. So
I think what Dale and I found out, one of the things that we're also proud about is our pharmacy intern program running.
Oh yeah.
With Rutgers and the other name
Jefferson.
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 Oh, gosh, that's what old age will get you. But one of the things that we found out we're now on our 11th intern, is not only, as Dale says all the time, if there's anything good ever come out of legalization, it's research. We currently have more research in the pipeline, not only on the potential benefits of cannabinoids as a medicinal property, but also, unfortunately, more so on the harmful consequences. But what we found by talking to these interns is, even within your profession, and I don't want to use this term, but the lack of awareness around today's marijuana. And it's one of the reasons that you guys started Isaac's, as physicians educating physicians on the reality of today's cannabis. But we were shocked at the level of lack of understanding and awareness around today's marijuana in the medical community.
Yeah, it still exists, unfortunately.
And will for a while.
And it will for a while, because if I came to all this because of the opioid epidemic, the opioid prescription epidemic, where physicians were the drivers and the source of why people were dying from opioids. And it took a long while for the medical community to understand that they were part of the problem, including myself. So I've actually was one of the first to do that. So to see that without even a public awareness, the medical community is not first. We think we are, because we're like the doctors and the scientists, but we don't. We follow the herd on a lot of issues. So, speaking of medical school and the medical community, I have a question to you from a medical student, which is really great. Joseph is now a fourth-year medical student going into, and I was just making fun of his future profession, his radiology. So,
if you can drink coffee in a dark room and get paid well for doing it, why not?
I tell them that. I told my daughters that. Just go do radiology. Do exactly what you're doing now, Dale. I see you drinking coffee. And then you could go like, this is my imitation of a radiologist. This is terrible. I'm sorry. I apologize.
I'm Irish. This is tea.
Like, my imitation of a radiologist is sitting in a dark room, drinking coffee, looking at a screen, and going like this. Normal. $500.
I told you, we stood in the wrong lines.
Yeah,
no. Anyway, Joseph is asking, marijuana is legal now. In almost all the states, it's legal. It's not a big deal. We know that, the medical community needs to step up its game as far as acknowledging the harms, documenting the harms. But what's the point of law enforcement? Why is law enforcement still involved if it's really legal?
Well,
Ed, go for it.
Well, I can tell you that, when you start looking at this from that standpoint, when you've got 22 states that have legalized for commercial adult use and 37 plus the district for medical, regardless of where you are in that conundrum there is still the illicit market. And trust me, the illicit market is alive and well. It is in your state and all the way up the Pacific Northwest. Any state that has done this has done a horrible job, including Dale State, of regulating this industry. So why we're still there, even though it might be legal for somebody 21 in his state to buy for commercial adult use or 18 with a card, there is still a vibrant illicit market. What legalization has done with this drug is allowed those engaged in the illicit market the ability, particularly in a home grow state, to hide in plain sight. And give you an example, Ronita, how bad it is in the state just to your north, Oregon. In the last 2 years, they spent almost $22 million in taxpayer money trying to get rid of the illicit market. They eradicated almost 500,000 plants, 1.3 million plants, almost 500,000 pounds of processed marijuana. That's on the illicit side. So that's why we're involved, because it doesn't matter whether you legalize this substance medically or commercial adult use. Nobody has done an effective job at regulating this industry much. Well, we still, in Kentucky, we still have folks from the Northeast coming down here buying our cheaply taxed cigarettes, taking them to New York and New Jersey and selling them for a huge profit. So you're never going to get rid of that market. And as long as that is there, then law enforcement has to play a role at trying to curtail. If you want to see a train wreck right now on a medical side, go to the state of Oklahoma.
Yes.
And look at that. When you're starting looking at drug trafficking organizations that are moving in, particularly Chinese national drug trafficking organizations, moving into a state, taking over a state and an industry, that's why we're involved. It doesn't matter whether you legalize this substance, there's still going to be that market available, and the illicit market's alive and well in every state that has done so.
What are the harms? Explain to me the harms of the illicit market. So it's like, okay, what's the difference of, legal weed and illicit weed? I mean, somebody who's listening to that saying, okay, so you spent $22 million. It sounds like a waste. Why do you spend $22 million in Oregon to get rid of weed? Like, who cares?
Well,
Dale, talk about tax. Why do they do this?
That's the bottom line here. It's, people want to have social equity issues about this, and when it gets right down to it, this is not a black thing. It's not a brown thing. It's a green thing. It's about money. And really, when it gets down to it, the market has changed. This is no longer about the legalization of the plant as a medical component. Okay. This is no longer about the legalization of the plant as a, quote, recreational product, right? We have gone so far past this. We're not about legalization of the plant. This is about the commercialization of THC purely for profit. That's why we see potency levels of these profit, the concentrates would have up to 60, 70, 80, 90% potency of THC. We use the analogy that today's THC is to marijuana what crack was to cocaine, what ice was to meth. Okay. If you want a more basic analysis, kids are initiating on Everclear versus stealing the beer out of dad's refrigerator out in the garage. That's really what we're talking about. That's the evolution. And where the money comes into this is I can walk into Ronit's dispensary here in Colorado. I can buy my commercially available weed. I pay the tax on it, which is now up to about 30%. Or the guy down the street says, hey, I'll sell you the exact same product and you don't have to pay any tax on it. So even when you get the guy in the business that says, yeah, I can sell you this, but if you want to meet me in the alley in 20 minutes, I can get you a pound of this stuff. All these little incidents of diversion are taking place. So that's how the black market is thriving. There is a high demand for this product out there. And the black market is filling that gap about, yeah, we'll sell it to you, but you're not going to have to pay any more money. Just pay us for the raw weed. And people are willing to do that. And the scary thing is, in both cases, you're really not sure what's in that stuff.
Yep.
You're not sure about the potency. You're not sure about co-contamination. You're not sure about, what pesticides did you use? What herbicides did you use? What fungicides did you use?
Well, I think the story today came out of fentanyl found in marijuana.
We've seen that several times.
Yeah.
And we hear that, and it's still kind of living in that Bigfoot category. Marijuana laced with fentanyl. Dogs and cats are living together. Film at 11. Well, what we're not sure is, are they intentional adulterations of marijuana with fentanyl, or are they accidental contaminations? Because a lot of these organizations sell more than one product. It's diversifying. So yeah, I'm selling weed over here, but I'm also selling cocaine here, and these guys are also, handling fentanyl. So when I'm putting that bag of weed together, was there something on my hands? Did something get co-contaminated? Who knows?
To me, the investment, the taxpayer investment in $22 million in Oregon on the illegal market is because I don't think people understand that illegal grows destroy the land with pesticides, destroy animals, and it's like an oil spill, but on public lands, and the crime that's associated with it and cost of life. It could be illegal drug deals can be
well, your state has been inundated. Your public lands. You have the largest share of public lands in the nation that reside in the state of California. And for years, drug trafficking organizations, particularly Mexican national drug trafficking organizations, have basically usurped the public lands in the state of California, and to a lesser extent, Oregon and Washington. They brought basically human trafficking. They brought workers over. They are decimating, destroying our nation's public lands. If you go to any of these trespass grow sites on the Pacific Northwest, if you've never been to one, or you need to look at the work that IERC Dr. Greta Wingart is doing, and look at some of that, those videos of, and we've got one of them on our website. It's just, I don't care what your politics is on weed. If you look at what these people are doing to our public lands, you would be appalled at the level of destruction, environmental impact that is. And then when you start talking about, you already mentioned, carbofurans, a banned pesticide in the 70s that the EPA banned carbofurans, are routinely found, neurotoxin that's routinely found on trespass grows in California, Oregon, and Washington. And we don't know if that stuff is actually reaching the commercial market in California. We suspect it might be. I don't think your state's doing a very good job at testing. As for that matter, I don't think anybody's doing a very good job at testing to determine the accuracy, not only of potency, but also what's in there are the microbials, the mold, the fungi, the heavy metals, all the other stuff that might actually be in this product. I don't think anybody's doing, and there are no national standards there for a state to follow. What is an accepted level of heavy metals in a product? That's the problem when you don't have a.
I actually think we have a standard, and I learned that from one of your connections, Dr. El Soli. We have a standard in order to sell marijuana for research, right? And actually, all these marijuana growers wanted to be in on this to sell it, and they could not meet the standard because you could not have heavy metals and pesticides in your weed when you're using it for research. Right. The difference between what El Soli does in his grows compared to what's out there in both the illegal and illicit grows is night and day as far as standards.
I agree. But, when you start talking about the standards, you're right. You can't reach them. They can't reach them. They don't want to reach them because they can't reach them. And that's a huge problem because the consumer really doesn't know. Number one, if I'm paying high dollar for top shelf marijuana, am I really getting top shelf marijuana, high potency product? Then number two, what the heck am I actually putting into my body? What is contained within this substance that I'm either inhaling, ingesting? Is it free of contaminants? Is it free of pesticides? Is it free of heavy metals? They just don't know. I can almost assure you it probably isn't.
Yeah, and I think we can, I don't know why we can't just prove it, but if you go to a legal dispensary, you're probably buying, they probably have in there illicitly grown marijuana, just because there's so much of it.
The likelihood is probably strong. We don't know that for sure, but I if I was a betting person, I'd probably say that exists in states that allow home grows, and for your matter in your state, where the last time I saw that only about a quarter of your industry was actually under state compliance. So you have about 3/4 of your industry that's operating outside of state compliance, and that's pretty alarming right there.
Right. What's alarming is that they don't care.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the industry is concerned right now. We went through the .com bubble years back, and right now the industry is going through their own .com bubble. The price per gram of weed has continued to kind of decline over the course of years. I mean, from what it was, let's say 10 years ago, we're down some 60 to 70%, from what it was costing per gram then to what they're getting now. So that cuts into profitability. There was a survey that came out that looked at the Oregon market, and what I thought was amazing was only 25% of the people from the industry said, yeah, we're actually making money. So this is, 3 out of 4 companies out there said they're operating in the red because they can't keep up with it. There's too much demand. There's too much overstocking. There's too much surplus. They can't meet the taxes. They can't hire and retain a workforce. They've cut money down to the bare bones, and there's just nothing left. So while the cost per gram for raw flour is going down, sadly, the cost per gram for concentrate, it's going up.
Right. So tell us more about the industry. I know the industry is competing with the alcohol industry as far as sales and acceptability. And in some places, there's more dispensaries, shops, pot shops than Starbucks in the area. Is it a lucrative business? Is this the green rush instead of the gold rush to get into this?
I don't think it is what they thought it was going to be. Maybe in the beginning. But because there's such a proliferation of the industry out there, I mean, it's like any market that deals with a commodity that people want. If I'm the only dispensary in town, I can name my own prices. But as soon as you open up, now I've got competition. And now I got Ed and I got Dave and everybody else is sitting there. And what happens is I have to bring my prices down to stay competitive. But I still have overhead to meet. And then Ed does the same thing. Then you bring your prices down. And finally, what we do is we work ourselves into a position that it's just not feasible. I mean, we're seeing major companies pulling out of markets just because taxation, cost of doing business, overhead, they're just not making the money they thought they were going to make on this. This is kind of like the old pyramid scheme. If you're going to get in on it, get in on the ground floor and be at the bottom where all the money's going to be. But now there's so much of it out there. I don't think the return on the investment is going to be there. But unfortunately, nobody's really tracking that information at the governmental level. We can tell you how much flour we sold and how much concentrate we sold. But unless you know what it's costing the state to do business, how do you determine if you're making a decision that's going to be in the red or the black when it comes to legalization? Sadly, I think a lot of these companies are realizing the money isn't there. They just didn't think it was going to crash out this fast.
And I think the alcohol model is one that we'll end up ultimately seeing play out with the marijuana industry. And that's 5 or 6 huge conglomerates that will control the market. And much as you see these microbreweries locally, that as one starts to succeed, one of the bigger companies goes in, swoops it up. So I think what we're going to end up, and when it's all said and done, and there'll be just a handful of companies or entities that actually control a vast majority of the marijuana market, much as we see with the 5 or 6 big alcoholic beverage conglomerates that are controlling most of the market share in this
and
country.
tobacco
For that matter too.
Yeah.
And it's the same people, actually, right?
And it's the same people. And you already start to see an infusion of the alcohol industry into the cannabis industry. And for that matter, I think also, unfortunately, I think there's also the playbook on how to survive litigation that's eventually coming, much as the tobacco industry, when you saw prior to the litigation in the 70s and 80s that resulted in a lot of tobacco companies going bankrupt. You saw a consolidation and only the strong survived. There's also a playbook on how to survive litigation. Yeah, they're going to pony up a lot of money, but at the end, they're going to come out a lot leaner, and they're going to survive it, unfortunately. So, unfortunately, I hope it doesn't take us the 75 years it took without tobacco to get to that epiphany moment that this was a bad thing this country. I'm hoping that we get there faster, that Americans wake up and realize that this is another addiction industry that is seeking to profit off the misery of addicted individuals in this country.
Yeah, so interesting. We were talking about money and how to track that. I wanted to ask you, aren't governments tracking that? Like, California doesn't want to do anything against the marijuana industry. Last year, we tried to have a bill to put labels on products, like we have labels on tobacco and alcohol, and we even have labels before you watch a movie that, be careful, you're going to see some flashing lights. We're all into warning labels, right? They would not do warning labels on marijuana products. And this year, we're trying to pass a candy ban, because all the babies, we thought, okay, you don't care about adults, maybe you'll care about babies who are getting poison. We'll see if that passes. But I think the government and our governor is all, follow the money. They're thinking they're going to strike it big with tax revenue from the cannabis industry. And that's what's being promised. So we should know that data. Or is that panning out?
You take a look at the money that our state here in Colorado is bringing in. We started off, just for history, we started off with a medical model back in 2000. It was on the books for the elections, and it passed. And then it just kind of sat benign. It really didn't do much for the first 7 or 8, 9 years. We had at one point less than 5,000 people on the registry as being a medical marijuana patient. All right. So then flash forward, the state and local cops and jurisdictions aren't doing anything. Then the feds announced the Ogden memo back in 2009. And they basically said in that memo, hey, if you're a federal prosecutor and you're thinking about using federal resources to go after a marijuana violator that's in compliance with state and local laws, it's not going to happen. So the impression was, well, state and local guys aren't doing anything, the feds aren't going to do anything, and then the floodgates kind of opened up. And this is where we first saw the real surge and proliferation of people coming in and open up businesses thinking they're going to strike it rich. Well, as time has progressed on, we've saturated the market like we just talked about, and prices are coming down and people are trying to adjust it. So the money initially looked really good. And keep in mind, in 2 years ago, we were bringing in like $1.2 million a day in Colorado in tax revenue. That's a chunk of change. I mean, that's like what an ED doc makes in the course of a year. I get that. But, us poor folks, and we just don't see that kind of money. This last year, those revenues have gone down because prices have gone down. We're now bringing in less than $900,000 a day in tax revenue. Still a chunk of change. That's the number that people take a look at in other states and go, wow, look at Colorado. Look how much money they're bringing in. What they don't realize is that this is a state that's based on tourism. It's the novelty factor. We were the first state to legalize. Well, now as more states have gone down the path of legalization here, why should I go to Colorado to buy my weed and take a vacation there when I can just go down the street to my local dispensary? So that's why we're seeing a tapering off here too. The culture is changing, the times are changing, and as a result, the money potential is changing. But still, politicians see those tax dollars and think this is going to be the solution to everybody's woes, and it just is not. It just is not. Nobody's tracking what it's costing on a daily basis for us to do business.
And I think you can probably take a look at the alcohol, tobacco numbers. You know, we've got a rich history, and that's one of the problems here with marijuana. We've got a rich history on cost benefit analysis between both alcohol and tobacco. And we know they're losing propositions in both cases. And as we now last year broached the 50 million mark for admitted marijuana users during the past year, as those numbers continue to climb, I can't help but believe that we're going to get close to those numbers. It's not going to be even a revenue neutral substance because alcohol and tobacco aren't. They cost society significantly. Right now, you've got to understand, you know, we're 10 years into this quote unquote legalized commercial adult use model. We've just not been there long enough to actually have some definitive numbers on what it's costing for every tax dollar we're making, what it's costing society. But we know, and you see it in your ED, we see it on our nation's highways. Marijuana continues to play a more prevalent role with either THC-induced psychosis, impaired driving, a host of issues that we're just now starting to get some significant data on to where we might be able to make some definitive conclusions on a cost-benefit analysis there. But we're just not there yet. We tried to do that a couple of years ago in Colorado. We commissioned or sent an RFP out. Nobody even replied to it. We worked with one of the leading addiction economists in this nation he wrote it for us. And he basically told us probably you're not going to get anybody because you're just too early in this game to try to figure out. But all anybody sees, like Dale says, at the bottom line, we're making $1 million a day in tax revenue, but you have no idea what it's costing your state, your local community, your city, your county as a result of this decision. And we're probably 10 years away from getting some definitive answers there, unfortunately.
Well, I don't see us looking into the quality, kind of following the alcohol model. When we had prohibition, people were, moonshining and putting methanol in the alcohol, and people were dying from that. And when alcohol became regulated, that went away. People are not, drinking a beer and dying and going blind from methanol anymore. Right now, the marijuana that's out there, again, high potency, fungus, pesticides, even states that have it legal, they're not regulating. Consumers are not aware of their heavy metal contamination of the product they're consuming. Do you see a future where marijuana will be like alcohol and where consumers can count on the regulation to make it safer, kind of like alcohol is safer?
Well, I'll jump in first, Dale, and you can, if we're going to continue down this path, because where we are today, Ronnie, is where we were in this country prior to the inception of the FDA, when states were left to regulate the food, the drugs, the cosmetics within their confines. And that's the reason that the FDA came into play, is the fact that there was inconsistent regulations, there was inconsistent application of regulations. So if we're going to continue to go down this road, there has to be some sort of intervention, most likely at the federal level, where we set specific standards. There is a body of testing at the federal level that accepts and approves these products. That much is, my state's famous for bourbon. And when you look at how highly regulated the bourbon industry is, that I know that when Dale gets a bottle of Blanton's in Colorado, it's the same bottle of Blanton's that's in New Jersey. That does not exist. The marijuana in Colorado, I don't know what's in it, as opposed to the marijuana in New Jersey, because that just doesn't exist today. And you already alluded to, nobody's done a good job. Nobody's even done good's even being nice. Nobody's done an average job at regulating this product in any shape, form, or fashion.
Well, I think if babies come on a regular basis to the hospital and are overdosing and in a coma in ICU, and if and on a daily basis we see cannabis-induced psychosis and the public has no idea, then yeah, we failed. Totally failed.
Well, I'll give you an example. Last year, 28 second graders in an elementary school in Jefferson County went to the hospital because a second grader brought in edible products from his mother that she purchased legally in an adjoining state. And they were all hospitalized because they ate all these edibles. And we never heard a word of that. That's the problem.
Yeah. That information is hidden.
It's not being made public. I think it's interesting, though, that in the last couple of weeks, I've seen more traction, even in CNN, which is, is not, about some of the negative consequences of legalization. And I think we're starting to see the window open to some dialogue and discourse about where we are today. But unfortunately, I fear that we're several years away from honest discussion about what's going on in your ED at Scripps, what's going on in Bill Lynch's ED in New Jersey. This information needs to get out. Hey, look, this is happening not once a week, but this is happening 2 and 3 times a day, every shift in hospitals across the country, and nobody wants to talk about this. And and Libby Stout said, this mental health crisis that it is being brought up on by high potency marijuana is probably the greatest mental health crisis that nobody in this country wants to talk about, that we're currently dealing with quietly. You aren't, but the people that are tasked with regulating this industry don't want to acknowledge it and don't want to speak about it.
Yeah. And you take a risk just to speak out about that. I mean,
as soon as you speak up against it, you're vilified. If this was the Wizard of Oz in the movie, okay, Toto is just now starting to pull the drape back to revolve that the wizard is actually just a guy.
Yeah.
And slowly but surely, the curtain's getting pulled back on the concept of the industry, the concept of legalization, and we're starting to see the facts. And the good thing about it, this goes back to what we've already said. Has anything good come out of legalization? Yeah, we're getting a lot better research. The other good thing that came out of this is people are asking better questions, and they're demanding better answers, not rhetoric or hype, but they're demanding better answers that are based in scientific, fact-based proof evidence. So, yeah, it's a case, like I said, if we're in the movie, the dog's just pulling back the curtain a little bit, but it's going to take a long time to get that curtain pulled all the way back.
Yeah.
So
it's hard these days because you'll read articles, and I think it's really hard for the public or even the medical community to know fact from fiction, because I'll just read an article saying, but marijuana is good for multiple sclerosis and for seizures and for this. And it's like, no, it's not. Who said that? I mean, the data doesn't prove that. No one.
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Yeah.
All right. So government's trying to do something about it. Biden-Harris administration, HSS, Health and Human Services, is thinking about scheduling marijuana. Is that an answer? Is that a good answer? I think one of the things I got out of talking to you today is I don't think marijuana's going away, right? We can agree that it's going to be there. We all agree that, the public needs to be informed on the harms so they can make informed decisions, because it's not going to go away. But if we wanted to make marijuana at least safer, then we need FDA to step in, and they can't because it's now illegal. So is scheduling marijuana a good idea? Should it be scheduled that way? FDA steps in and does their job like they do for food and cosmetics and alcohol, right? You were saying that alcohol became safer and people weren't going blind for methanol when FDA came in and created standards.
Well, you got to put it in perspective.
Yeah.
To understand where we're at, you got to understand that marijuana has always been classified as a Scheduled I controlled substance. By definition, no accepted medical use in the United States, even under the care of a doctor. All right. So I attended a conference a few years back, and it was a marijuana conference. And the two things that had the tongues wagging and the most concern was, one, the feds were going to step in, And two, they would reschedule marijuana down to a 2, a 3, or 4, or 5. Okay. They either want it left as a Schedule 1 where it's at, or take it completely off the books altogether. Once you move it down in a schedule of 2, 3, 4, or 5, you're now talking about a class of drug that has to be administered by prescription by a pharmacist. Right now, there's no major medical college that endorses marijuana blindly for a therapeutic agent. There's no school of pharmacy that I'm aware of that teaches, we need to use marijuana as a therapeutic agent in patient care. So by moving it down, all you're going to do is, if that happens, you're turning dispensaries into pharmacies, and a lot of these dispensaries are going to close. So that's why the industry is so concerned about it. They would rather just leave things as it is or take it completely off the books so that they've got full control over it.
Yeah. So is scheduling a good or bad idea? The problem I have with the scheduling marijuana is that marijuana is a plant with 500 different chemicals. Many of the chemicals, we don't know what they are. So how can it's like legalizing all 500 that you didn't even know? It doesn't make sense.
The science isn't there yet. We don't have the scientific basis to make that decision.
I think actually we do. We have an example of what happened with the Farm Bill and the Delta 8 and 9 products. They're saying that that's marijuana, right? And that would be legal. So it's okay now to prescribe Delta 8 marijuana that we know that has killed people.
Well, and here's the problem. The conundrum we deal with this drug is the fact that if I stand up here and I tell you the 114 plus cannabinoids within marijuana, the plant, the cannabis sativa L plant, there is nothing of medical value there, I'm lying to you.
Yep.
But if I stand up here and also say that crude marijuana, either smoked or ingested, is medicine and a medical delivery device, I'm also lying to you. What we need to do and what we should be scheduling is the different cannabinoids, cannabinoids within marijuana that have medical value, that much as we've done with Epidiolex. When Epidiolex got put through the FDA clinical trials, and in 2018, the FDA approved it in July, September, the DEA rescheduled it to a 2, then moved it to a 5. Now it's off the schedule altogether, but it still requires a doctor's prescription and a pharmacist to dispense it. That's what we need to be doing. You can't just take the whole plant itself, and as you said, 500 compounds, 114 cannabinoids, and say this is now a Schedule 2. The science doesn't support it.
Digoxin is a scheduled drug, but the oleander plant, which digoxin comes from, is not something that you scheduled. You can't schedule a plant with all sorts of. It doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
But so the scheduling thing, probably not a good idea, both by the supporters and opponents of marijuana for different reasons.
One of the biggest things on scheduling, which got relieved in the last Congress, was the Medical Marijuana Research Act that Biden signed into law last December. That actually, one of the things that researchers and everybody clamored about, well, we can't do research because it's Schedule 1. Well, this act removes most of the onus barriers that are attributed to doing research to a Schedule 1. So from that standpoint, now it's a lot easier, it's a lot cheaper to do legitimate research without scheduling that. From a scientific standpoint or a medical component, we're not doctors, we're cops, but how do you schedule a plant?
Right. That was the point.
You just can't do it. So
I don't think people who are, into the industry are into the research, because the research would go, it's not going to say, okay, put this marijuana plant on your eyeball and cure your glaucoma. they're gonna say, we're gonna get the THC, we're gonna make into a solution, and we're gonna follow it in a pharmacy, and we're gonna sell it as medicine. That's where research is going with the different cannabinoids. The research is not. That's the fallacy. The research is not going, hey, smoke some of this and your glaucoma will go away.
Well, and here's another problem with research. Let's take the labs at the University of Mississippi. So Dr. El Solis down there, they do a great job. They're a great group of people. What they are growing for testing is not what's available out in the public marketplace right now.
Right. That was an amazing. It has nothing to, they are not at all similar. The industry cannot meet the standard that's required for it to be sold as research for people. So again, you're not even comparing things.
It's apples and oranges, especially when you get down to potency.
Teach us what we learned from alcohol. How did alcohol, moonshine with methanol, become safe or safer? I mean, we still have a lot of problems with alcohol, but at least we know that there's not, poisons and heavy metals when you buy a beer or a bottle of wine.
Well, it's just
it goes back to standards.
Yes.
Ed, you know about moonshining. You're from your neck of the woods. Go for it.
Well,
Wait, and your grandfather did that, right?
Yes. They make beer, but
Okay.
The bottom line is shiny. If you don't take that first cut off, that's methanol, and that stuff will kill you. But it's actually the application of consistent accepted standards throughout the industry that are, more importantly, that are enforced rigorously, that allow us to consume alcohol across the spectrum, whether it be beer, wine, or heavy spirits, with the same level of consistency, knowing that this is what the bottle says is in there, is what's in there. The percent of alcohol by volume is exactly right, because they know in the bourbon industry, if they come in and you say that you're at this percent and you're 1% over, you lose the whole batch. So there is rigorous enforcement of standards that allow us to consume, that those that choose to consume alcohol, consume it safely. If you consume it safely and responsibly, then you're going to be okay. The problem is their standards, and they're rigorously enforced across the continuum. Whether you make bourbon in Colorado or you make bourbon in Kentucky, the same rigorous standards apply, and they're enforced to the same level. That doesn't occur with marijuana.
I think that that's a really, really important lesson. When we look at bills going through Congress about marijuana legalization, is that caveat in there, or are they just getting a free pass to do whatever to sell heavy metals? If the government is going to legalize marijuana, is there a contingency in there for that standardization?
Nothing that I have seen on the Hill has any contingency for assuring the safety of the product that they're seeking to legalize. That's kind of the conundrum with federal legislation right now. They're trying to get it over the hump to where it's legal, but they're really not having much discussion about what do we do after we do this. Kind of like,
well, you got to do it together. You can't do it one at a time.
Exactly. Matter of fact, you should be on the front side of what it's going to look like before you even do it, so that when you do it, here are the standards, here are the protocols, and here's how we're going to enforce it. Here's what's going to happen to you should you be outside of these standards and protocols. That does not exist in any legislation I've read at the federal level.
And that's where I think also the public is just not aware. They think, well, marijuana has been legal in California for since 1996, and we have regulations, so they can go to a nice, pretty looking dispensary, and they have no idea that they are not held to these standards, whether you're calling it adult commercial use or medical, same plant with same contaminants, and without that enforcement.
I don't think a lot of people understand that you walk into a dispensary and you see, OG Blueberry Kush on the medical side, and you see OG Blueberry Kush on the recreational side. That came from the same bin in the back. There's nothing magical about the title of medical. It's all the same weed. It's just how it's being sold and how it's being marketed. And like Ed said, until the day comes when someone comes in and goes, all right, you want legalization? You got it. But we're taking over. Nationally, one standard. Nationally, one set of rules. Nationally, one set of enforcement guidelines. And everyone's got to play by the rules. And that was one of the ones that conference I was telling you about.
I think you two need to connect with the National Academy of Medicine that's now doing a paper on this and make that case.
We can inform and educate all day long. Can't lobby, but we can inform and educate.
Yeah. I think that would be an important historical, science, evidence-based message to make it safer, because I see people talking about, I've seen doctors, people who come in scrummating, saying, okay, well, why don't you change to edibles? And it's like, wait a second. how do you know that that potency of that edible is not more than what they're smoking? It's maybe more. How do you know what that edible even has? People think if it comes in a nice package, that it's safe. And they don't understand that.
And see, Renee, that goes back to the exact core of what we're talking about. This is why we've got interns from coming through the pharmacy schools. This is why we have a speakers bureau. This is why we spend too many hours of our lives in airplanes and hotel rooms trying to share this message. I mean, we've got a virtual presentation coming up in November. It's called the Western States Marijuana Summit. The last time we did it, it was attended by 37 states. Nearly 600 people were in attendance over a multiple-day virtual event. I mean, you know what it's like to sit through a 60-minute Zoom presentation. You know, we kept them online for virtually 2 days. And it's a great way that we can share this information, try to raise the awareness so people start asking the very questions that you've been asking here for the last hour. You know, it's a chance to inform and educate. And that's the mission. How do we displace the misinformation? We put facts in its place. What a concept.
That summit, again, as Dale alluded to, actually is a 4-day summit. The Western States Marijuana and Opiate Summit occurs this November. Marijuana is 14th and 15th, and the opiates 16 and 17. You'll be there. We should be having a link shortly for those that want to register. I know from the marijuana side, we have a really good agenda. I've not seen the opiate. I know you're presenting, Ronit, but you know, it was a huge success in 21, as Dale alluded to. We had over almost 600 people attend from 37 states. So truly it was a national summit as opposed to a Western State Summit, which is what it originally started out in 15. NMI has been a sponsor of that since the Western States started in 2015. And we're sponsoring it again this year with the San Diego Imperial Vita HIDTA. That's just one of the things we do. We're also sponsoring the Midwest Impaired Driving Summit in Itasca, Illinois, November 1st through the 3rd. And I understand you're going to be there too. And I get the privilege of introducing you at your session.
How cool. Are you going to call me kiddo?
I'm going to call you kiddo. I'm not going to call you kiddo.
I love when you call me kiddo. I'm like almost 60 years old.
That's just one of the things that a couple of things that we do. You know, we're financial sponsors for both these summits, is just trying to do whatever we can to get information in the consumer's hands so they're making an informed choice. That's something we have not been doing in this country with respect to marijuana. We've not been making informed choices about this, whether you want to do this or don't do that. And we've got to start doing that. So we're excited about these 2 upcoming summits. And it's just part of our mission, who we are and what we do. And, you know, we have a website, thenmi.org. And it's got a host of information. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And I'd ask people to, I don't know what you're supposed to like us or share us or join us or whatever you do. I'm not supposed to make fun of social media. I'm a dinosaur when it comes to that. But that's the way you reach people now, is through these platforms. And
they're finding you. I know medical societies have reached out to you. And and so that's that.
We're getting a lot of traction on our website. I even had people, proponents actually say that, you know, you really got a balanced site here. There's not much we can refute about what's on your site. We thought
here's a word from our sponsor.
We were going to see demon weed, but we didn't. So, yeah, that's us right there for your folks. Our Twitter handles, where we are on Facebook, Instagram, and a link to our website. You know, Dale and I, you can find us on the website. If you need us, reach out to us individually. Our contact information is there, and we're more than happy to get you whatever resource or, for that matter, whatever you need. We'll find it and we'll get it to you.
Awesome. National Marijuana Initiative. Free stuff from the government, free education, important education available to you. So definitely reach out to the dynamic duo of Ed and Dale with National Marijuana Initiative, part of HIDTA. I want to say thank you to Joseph, our medical student on the home stretch to becoming an MD and the stress of matching in a residency. Thank you for your question and good luck in your future. You're going to be a great doctor. And thank you, Ed, Shemelya, and Dale Quigley. I'm a big fan of NMI, honored to be on your Speakers Bureau. And thank you for the many podcasts that you also sponsored.
The privilege is ours, my dear.
Yes, it is. We're glad to be a part of what you do, and we're proud of you too, Doc. Looking forward to seeing you in Illinois.
We'll see ya. Thank you for listening to High Truths on Drugs and Addiction, where national experts bring you facts and answer your questions. This week's episode would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsor. A sincere and warm thank you to Isaac, the International Academy on the Science and Impact of Cannabis, doctors educating on the harms of marijuana. Visit isaac1.org, that's IASIC1.org, to view their library that translates medical journals for public understanding, listen to their speaker series, and follow the science on marijuana. High Truth's producer is Dave Rivas from Davey Boy Productions. I am your host, Dr. Oneet Lev. We hope we brought your day a little bit more High Truths.